Well, hello there. I'm Kermit Woodall. Um, I'm one of the founding members of the All New Amazing Stories. Um, Back in 2012, Steve and I hooked up and started pushing out a digital magazine as well as a blog, which Steve is the overlord of the blog. Um, my history in science fiction isn't dramatic or interesting, so I won't bother to bore you with it. Um, However, I have managed to get, cat butt.
So cute.
Um, um, wait, wait a minute, it's the invasion of the cat people here.
So distracting, yes.
So I've published a few stories, done lots of artwork, um, worked and moderated at plenty of conventions, and here I am.
Okay. Just so people know, what is your official title and what do you do for the magazine?
That would be telling. I am the creative director. I oversee the art, the layout. I oversee occasional projects. It just depends on what is creatively needed and isn't being the editor of the magazine, which I hear we have somebody who takes care of that.
Okay. Thank you. Liz, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Liz Hirst, and I am one of the assistant editors, also sometimes copy editor for the Amazing Select. And I live in Hamilton, Ontario. I have a book out, Debates in the Marsh from Renaissance Press, and Distant Early Warning is coming up next year. Generally, what I do for the magazine is I do a lot of flush reading, and I help with the submission process and do some copy editing and proofreading.
Okay. And I'm the other person on the panel. I am the moderator and host for today's session. My name is Ira Nayman, and I am the editor of Amazing Stories magazine. I really don't necessarily have that much background in editing, but I have been writing for a very long time, so I know something about words. Randall, can you vouch for Jeanette? Jeanette? Nope, no idea? Okay, Jeanette will have to be left waiting. So, Amazing Stories, just very quickly. The way this is going to work is that we will talk for maybe 20 minutes or half an hour, and then I'm very happy to open it up for questions. My suggestion would be if anybody has a question at any time, you can type it into the chat area of Zoom, and we can get to it then, or we can get to it when we get to it, or we can just wait until I open it up for questions. I'm easy that way. I also say that while I like for the panel to get the first words in, if you have a question that's absolutely burning and relevant to something that's said before the 20 minutes or the 30 minutes or however long it is until we get to questions, I'll take the question then. The best thing is to let the session grow organically. So, Amazing Stories. You probably all know the history, but just in case you don't, Amazing Stories was the first science fiction magazine. The first issue came out in, I believe, April of 1926, which means next year will be 95 years. It'll be 95 years since the first publication. Before then, there were certainly science fiction stories published in magazines, but no magazine dedicated specifically to fiction. The science fiction stories that were published tended to be published in popular science, popular mechanics, popular magazines that were nonfiction primarily.
Also magazines that specialized in thrilling stories.
Okay. Steve likes to say that, or likes to point out that Amazing Stories was, in addition to sort of one of the foundations of science fiction, one of the foundations of science fiction fandom. because Hugo Gernsback ran a letters column, and he insisted when he ran the letters column that everybody put their full address on each letter as it was published. And what this allowed people who liked the magazine and who liked science fiction generally to do is to start mailing each other comments and talk about their enthusiasms and stuff. And you see the beginning of fan communities in that phenomenon. In that first issue, there were excerpts from novels by Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, and just about everybody who is anybody in science fiction has had something published in Amazing Stories over the years, as you might imagine. So it's a very storied magazine. It was published on and off in the second half of the 20th century, and it was about 15 years ago, Steve, that I see Steve is back.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes!
hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Then I've just sort of given the potted history of the magazine, but Steve, would you please?
You mean you proceeded without me?
I know. It's a heartbreak, but I was gonna make balloon animals for people, but it seemed like a better thing to do. Steve, please introduce yourself to everybody.
Hi, I'm Steve Davidson. I'm the publisher of Amazing Stories, and brilliant for having hired Ira and Kermit to work on the magazine with me, not to mention agreeing to allow Ira to bring Elizabeth on board. So
Thank you, Steve.
yeah, about 2008, I was working in a company that made less than lethal weapon systems and paintball gear. And I was head of the IP department. And my job was to manage our intellectual property portfolio, which can be extremely boring from time to time. So I would look up trademarks that interested me as a way of relieving the boredom. And one of the ones that I checked was Amazing. I've had a love affair with that magazine since becoming a science fiction fan. And one day I checked out the listing for it, and it said dead as opposed to alive. And I literally called my wife over to look at the screen and read to me what it said, because I thought I was having a seizure or dreaming or something. And she read what it said. We sat down and discussed the possibility of registering the mark. We ultimately decided that it would be a good thing to do. And here's the real story. I do the filings for that company. I did the filing for myself, and I was about 1 hour behind a Canadian publishing firm that intended to use the magazine name for Canadian travel books. And I was notified by the trademark office that somebody was ahead of me. I consulted with my attorney. He reminded me that something like 80% of all trademark filings never go through. And I told the trademark office that rather than just tossing my application, they should hang on to it. And several months later, they informed me that they were going ahead and granting the trademark. That was 2008. Through all kinds of different reasons, it eventually cleared in 2011. But by that point, we had had a lot of opportunity to figure out what we wanted to do with it, how we were going to approach it. I went to a bunch of my contacts in the paintball industry who I knew had money, and they had agreed to provide some backing. And then that whole thing just completely fell apart. At the same time, I had announced the acquisition, and a bunch of people in the industry started needling me about doing something with it. And so we went from a fully funded entity to trying to bootstrap everything. And that's pretty much the origin. I started the website The concept was a social networking magazine. I sent out inquiries to many people asking them if they would like to participate in the blog. I believe that Ira was one of the very early responders. I got 75 people, many of them recognizable names in the field, to come on board at the very beginning. We existed as a daily blog with multiple authors for quite a while. My wife got ill, subsequently passed. During that time, Ira took over managing the dailies on the website. And when we all got together and collectively said, you know, enough is enough, we've got to do something to actually publish the magazine, Ira asked if it was all right if he tried his hand at editing it. Kermit volunteered to do art directing and design and whatnot, and I said, yeah, what the heck, let's go for it, and here we are.
Yeah, I should probably unmute myself if I want to talk. When the three of us were first talking about the kind of magazine that we wanted, we kind of took a look at what was being published in the field and decided we didn't want to do that. Kermit or Steve, could you perhaps address that question? What were those discussions about?
Well, Kermit and I had been talking for a while about design and look, and we both agreed that we didn't want to do an electronic magazine only. For better or for worse, and we've gotten advice from the best in the fields telling us that we're crazy, but we felt that we were wedded to paper, and we wanted to do paper. I believe personally very strongly, don't take this as a negative towards the other side of things. Take it as a positive towards what we're doing.
Yeah.
I generally refer to ebooks as electronic files because they are missing so much of what a physical book brings or a magazine brings to the picture. You've got smell, you've got touch, you've got the layout, you have the ability to more easily create a flow of an issue where it carries you from the cover through the stories. It gives an impression that's entirely different than just reading an electronic story. And I wanted to try and preserve that. I wanted to try and prove that we could make a print magazine viable in this day and age of everything is electronic. We have not proven that yet, but we're still trying. One of the things that we discussed that we did not like was that the current magazines that are in print, mostly digest in size, they have given up a lot of the elements that go into making a magazine in order to reduce their costs, because they're up against the same economics that we are. And we said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to have an illustration with every story. We're going to have a font size that's readable without a magnifying glass. We're going to engage in pleasing presentation and layout. And we're not going to worry so much about the print costs. You know, if you do 10-point type versus 8-point type, you're adding pages, which is adding print cost. We're not going to worry about that. Does it look good? Do we like the way it comes across? Does that illustration with that story make you want to dive in? That kind of a thing. And add cartoons and add poetry and all the things that go into largely our prior experience of the science fiction magazine. And try and find ways to make it work today.
Okay. Kermit, can you, since we're talking about the visual style, the visual look of the magazine, can you jump in here and talk about your approach as the art director.
Well, Steve hit on a number of points there. The main thing being is that I think the illustrations really help the stories come alive and add a new dimension to them. I've worked hard to make certain that we have a lot of talented artists supplying art in every issue, and that we're representing more than a singular style in the magazine. So towards that, we've had artists not just from Canada, the US, and Mexico, but we've got Russia, Japan, Africa, and various European artists contributing as well. And our styles run from 3D renderings to photorealistic to surreal. And, you know, although we've only had 5 issues out, we're trying quite hard to make certain that these styles are represented on the covers as well as the interior content. Our layout in the magazine internally, we're aiming towards a more modern layout, 3-column, full-page illustrations for the stories, and whichever cover story there is, we try to go for at least 6 illustrations within the story itself. That's one of the things that I only discovered by looking at older science fiction magazines, was the illustrating within stories. On the Amazing Selects, which we mentioned earlier, and I should point out, Amazing Selects is our book imprint designed to feature short novels with extra supporting content in them. Steve is there, by the way, showing you some of the current issues. I'll give you a little hint of an upcoming issue. This one's coming out very likely this month. This is David Gerald's Adrift in a Sea of Souls. This one is heavily illustrated throughout the book as well. Oh, well, I'm not going to be able to manage that. But yes, one of the things, too, that's largely true, but not represented in this book, is we aim for a family-friendly audience with the magazine. Out of our books, this is the only one which is definitely an adult book. The magazine, though, we're trying to aim towards family-friendly. One of the things that has stuck in my head for about 20 years now was a past editor of one of the big 3 U.S. fiction magazines once did an editorial about the graying of the science fiction readership, how so many science fiction readers are going gray and there's no young people involved. Yes, I see everybody fiddling with their hair. And it's here too. But the basic thing I observed with that, and all 3 of us talked about back in the beginning, was, yeah, the reality is if all you do are publish stories that appeal to adults, why are you surprised that only adults are reading your magazine? It's not necessarily, it wouldn't be a criticism if the editor wasn't completely blind to the reality of what they were seeing. And I know since then, from going to conventions, I was been away from conventions at the time, But I knew my local science fiction bookstore had plenty of young readers in it. And when in the last couple of years, as I've been going to convention, there are tons of young readers out there. I put it down to and the editor was also complaining about Star Trek and Star Wars books at the time. And my observation then is that's like complaining that Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon were ruining the magazines of the 30s and 40s. There is something to appeal to everybody. And if you've got something that appeals to a younger crowd, they're going to eat it up. And as probably most of everybody here knows, all the main science fiction magazines right up through the 60s would never publish anything inappropriate for children. So their magazines were inherently family friendly. And nowadays, that's not necessarily a rule anymore, but we do try to follow it.
Mm-hmm. The one other thing that I think is really important from those initial stories, initial conversations about the magazine, was that the three of us are of a certain age, shall we say, that we actually remember science fiction that looked towards a hopeful future. And we were looking at the kind of science fiction landscape, and I'm not talking specifically magazines necessarily, because this permeates the novel, science fiction novels as well. They seemed all to be quite dark. A lot of dystopian fiction, a lot of just negative visions of the future. And the science fiction we grew up with was a lot more hopeful, including the original Star Trek. And we wanted to create a magazine that, in my way of thinking about it, makes the future look fun, makes the future look like a place you might actually want to live in, as opposed to someplace you want to run away from and stay away from as much as possible. And so that is also a factor in what goes into the current incarnation of the magazine. Liz hasn't had a chance to talk yet, so I wanted to ask Liz specifically about your experience as a slush reader. We don't actually hear from slush readers all that often, and so whatever you'd like to say.
Mostly that's the PTSD.
Sorry?
I said you don't hear from them mostly because of their PTSD.
Ah. So, I mean,
It's usually pretty safe until they start to twitch.
Well, you see, that is the joke, but actually, I love the quality of the stories we get for Amazing Stories. I'm consistently blown away by the general quality of the stories that we get. I would say that there are far more rejections of stories that are actually very competent, but just not quite there, rather than PTSD ones. And I wanted to throw something in on Ira's previous point too about classic science fiction being more hopeful. As one of the younger members of the team, I would say I'm really behind this mission as well, mostly because my dad used to read to me the classic science fiction. I had a wonderful dad who read to me from the time I was a little kid. And also I grew up on Star Trek because that was all my granddad ever watched. My granddad is a very smart man who I think should have been an engineer, honestly. And he's always been fascinated with science fiction and comics and the latest technology in film. And so yeah, it's a great mandate. But going back to the Slush, I think it's a really great magazine to work for in the Slush, because not only can we kind of set our own pace and we're treated really well working here, but also just we hear from a lot of really wonderful authors, and I almost on a weekly basis read something that makes me go wow, and that I think about, that I really think about for days afterwards. And it's been an enriching experience for me, and I think I know the other slush readers aren't here right now, but we had a panel earlier in the year at Amazing Con, and I think they would all say the same thing.
Okay. I'm just going to ask everybody briefly, silly question, but kind of cool. What's your favorite part of working on the magazine? Steve, start with you.
You shouldn't have started with me.
Okay, Kermit, start with you.
No, I'll take it. I'll take it. I think the thing that excites me the most is, and this is very personal, and you may all not appreciate it, but I own Amazing Stories. You have to understand, I started watching science fiction on television with Fireball XL5 back in, what was it, 64, 65? Before that, my mother told me bedtime stories that you could classify as science fiction. I don't know why. She's not particularly fond of the genre, but that's the direction that she went in. And as soon as I learned that there was a first science fiction magazine, it started my love affair. I found my first copy of the magazine in a farmer's market used bookstore. It was the first magazine that I submitted stories to when Ted White was editing it. I got a couple of nice notes back from him, but it was apparent that I needed to do a lot more writing before anything of mine was acceptable. I did get a couple of letters published in the magazine. I got to talk to Forey Ackerman about it. I got to talk to Isaac Asimov about it, Lester Del Rey, a whole mess of old names when I was going to conventions, which I started going to at a very young age. And Bob Madel, who is one of the few remaining members of First Fandom, who was at the first convention, helped put on the first convention, and is still with us at 100 years in a few months, sold me the copy of the first issue of Amazing Stories way back in 1978 or something like that. So it has been a personal love affair of mine from the very beginning. And the fact that it's back in print and has an existence in any way, shape, or form is constantly exciting to me. We're not quite realizing a lot of the things that we have in mind for it. That's largely financially based. We're doing what we can, but every day, almost every day, something new of a possibility to do with the magazine and the other things that surround it present itself. Like, we pulled off Amazing Con in a month and a half of preparation, and it's now we're working on the second one for next year. We're working with folks in media to do some other things that we can't quite announce detail on right yet. We had the license with NBC for the television show, which was, I wouldn't say exciting, but certainly a learning experience, and has passed on a lot of knowledge, useful knowledge to us about moving forward in different ways. So it's really just I'm getting to live a personal dream. I would like it to be further along and better financed and everything else. I have my disappointments, but the bottom line is I own Amazing Stories.
Okay. Kermit?
For me, I still remember back many years ago, I guess around 2008, from what Steve said, when I read on Boing Boing that this guy named Steve Davidson had gotten Amazing Stories and was going to be doing something with it. I asked my late friend Bud Webster, may he rest in peace, if he'd ever heard of this Steve Davidson guy. And because Bud being Bud, he knew everybody, and he knew Steve, and he put us in touch with each other, and Steve and I clicked instantly. And the big question then was, you know, did our philosophies of what would make a good magazine match? Fortunately, they did. What I enjoy most about it is basically the position I carved out for myself. I knew that I wasn't an editor. At the time, I'd never written a science fiction story, so you wouldn't want me in charge of that. But I am the child of two artists. My mother was a fan of the original Twilight Zone when it aired, and a fan of Star Trek, but she doesn't read science fiction. But at least I came by my fandom honestly. Oh, she also was known for getting a letter published in the original Mad comic book. So I got her sense of humor too. I really do enjoy working with the artists. I haven't discovered yet whether I'm a more annoying art director than all the others, or if I'm a more enjoyable art director. Nobody's willing to say anything as long as they're hoping to get another paycheck from me. So, but I'm very specific. I believe in the concept that the cover has to be exciting and make people want to pick it up and look at it. I know from conventions that we're achieving that. I also, I had, and I still do for the most part, even though it's getting better, but I had observed that all the main print magazines tended to have really boring covers over the last 3 decades. No, that's an exciting cover. Thank you, Steve. Most of the covers of the old magazines tended to have really generic looking space scenes or generic looking, oh, I didn't do that one. It was the other problem. Aside from the dystopian dark fiction, I looked at the magazines and I didn't see covers that would make me want to pick them and buy them. There was one when we first started the print issues. It's almost 2 years ago now. I was looking at an issue of one of the 3 magazines. By the way, you'll notice I'm not naming names. I like to be fair. They all sucked. No, they didn't. But they had a cover that was supposed to be somebody on a planet that had skyscraper tall stacks of books. The image there looked like it was painted by an elementary school student. It was really poor watercolor work. And some of the other covers I was looking at, I was chatting with someone later at a convention when we launched the magazine that August at Worldcon, and someone was saying, oh, well, you know all those covers you like on those things there, because we were actually looking at them. They go, they're all reprints of covers from books from 10, 20 years ago. So the best covers they had been running were old art that they were licensing cheaply. And it's not like art is expensive. The fiction and the articles are expensive. If for nothing else, you have to buy them in bulk, you know, from a group of writers over and over again. But, you know, artists, you know, especially interior art, it is not that pricey. And I've had no problem finding artists to paint covers. That last one that Steve was holding up is a cover by Vincent DeFate, one of the most award-winningest, famousest artists still alive today. And he gladly painted that. And then he gave the original painting to his son before I could get it. But yeah,
One of the
and one of the other things I wanted to mention too is that I had noticed in a lot of the three magazines is they're not using a lot of modern artists who work digitally, but almost everybody works digitally nowadays. Even David Hardy, one of the old space artists from way back, is working digitally these days. If you're not going to work with modern artists, you're not going to be representing the field very well. And we've got more artists at a higher quality than at any point I could look at in the past. They're because of the ability for them to do concept art for games, card game art, comic books, on and on and on. There are just so many amazing artists out there, and it's so fun working with these people.
Okay.
one of
Did
the
you want to jump in for a
things that went one of the things that went along with that was a discussion early on of what we wanted on the cover. And we very quickly all agreed that for the most part, we wanted a cover illustration that illustrated one of the stories in the magazine.
Clearly illustrated it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
It also had to be exciting, evocative, emotional stuff, which was what we hadn't been seeing a lot of in a long time on magazines that are on the newsstands.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Liz, do you remember what the question was?
Yes, the question was, what do we like the most about working for
Okay.
Amazing Stories? Okay, I'm going to do like everyone else has done and start with a story. So I come at a lot of literature from an academic background. I have 2 degrees in English literature, and I actually specialized in popular literature. My master's work was on the Victorian adventure story, the boys' school story, and Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone as it relates to post-colonialism. So it was really fascinating work, and I've really dug into a lot of popular literature, especially science fiction and fantasy, from an academic perspective. And the approach that's given me is that I really feel like any field of literature is a dialogue. And not to mention, you know, I went through school understanding the importance of amazing stories as a property and as a magazine, and you know what it's meant to the field. And so number one, being part of this dialogue, being able to be a part of this, and you know, helping to determine what goes in the magazine and helping determine quality for the magazine is just such an exhilarating experience, because this is what I've always wanted, is to be part of the dialogue in the science fiction community, and you know, part of what's included. And just as I said before, I think it's really exciting to be able to learn about new authors, find new stories and new series that I'm enthusiastic about. I'm such a huge fan of Alan Steele's Captain Future series now, having read them, and you know, it's they're really great, everybody. And I've just gotten to know so many wonderful people and wonderful stories and books, and it's really wonderful. It's a really vital and really in the moment kind of thing, and I adore it.
Okay, great. I'm going to try and give a quick answer. One of the things that I've learned over the past couple of years editing the magazine is that I like working with other people's words almost as much as working with my own. And there is a particular pleasure in the back and forth between the editor and the writer. Now, some people have the mistaken impression that the relationship between the editor and the writer has to be confrontational, but with most of the writers, particularly surprisingly the well-known writers that I've worked with, it's been more of a dance, and it's been an understanding that it's a dance, and that we are all, writer and editor, working towards the same goal, which is to make the story as good as possible. And then it's just a matter of finding the ways to do that. And there is a particular pleasure when the magazine comes out, and I know the story, I know the shape the stories were in before they made print, and the journey that they took to get to that stage. And that's delightful to me. We have a question, at least one question that I know of. It's from Graham Darling, who gave it to us a few minutes ago. Steve, you might be able to answer this one. Are the current Amazing archives complete, or are you missing any issues?
Archives?
Yes. Graham, do you want to expand on that question?
You'd have to be unmuted.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Yeah, just past issues of Amazing magazine. Do you have them all?
Do I have them all? No.
Or the public, or the company, or whatever,
No, no.
Okay.
What I purchased was the trademark.
Yes.
I did not purchase the company or any of the assets or inventory. If you go to the website and look up the article, rights, clearances, and something or other, rights and clearances ought to get you there. There is a relatively lengthy explanation of what we acquired and the state of all the properties that have appeared in Amazing Stories over the years.
Sure.
Um,
No matter where you got them from, are you still looking, or you get them from, are you still looking for old issues of Amazing that you don't have yet?
Well, okay. When I met Bob Madel, I very quickly realized at the time, I was a high school student or a junior high school student, there was no way that I could afford to buy everything that I wanted to buy. And I ultimately settled on my personal collection to be the volume 1, number 1 issues of all the English language science fiction and fantasy magazines. And I have assiduously gone about completing that version of a pulp magazine collection. And I've got close to 82% of them. There are a few standouts which are extremely rare and expensive, but I have managed to obtain a couple that also fit into that category. And one day I hope to complete it. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at the issue, most of the magazine issues for Amazing Stories run are now digitized and available in what I consider to be illegal accesses, but they're still there. So if you need to do research or whatnot, this will also give me an opportunity to introduce the fact that we work with another publishing company, Futures Past Editions, also known as Digital Parchment Services, one of the first ebook publishers, who bring out ebook and pod anthologies of the stories from the older magazines year by year. So we have a Best of Amazing 26, Best of Amazing 27, and so on. That's an ongoing project. And Jean Marie Stein is the editor over there, and she has an extremely long history with the genre, and pretty much any question that I may have about a story that appeared in the magazine, she can answer. I do have a variety of specific issues that contain stories that I was interested in or cover art that I was interested in, but given my personal financial circumstances, it's tough to justify spending $600 for a single copy of a pulp magazine, kind of a thing. So I have resources that gave me access to everything that has appeared in the magazine, but do I have them in my own personal collection? No.
Selena O'Rourke asks, your submission page mentions welcoming diversity. Do you have any numbers as to how successful you've been on that front, and thoughts about your work toward that goal? Yes, I can address that question. In some ways, I think we have been fairly successful. In terms of gender parity, we have just about as many female authors as we do male authors in each issue.
And artists.
And artists. Kermit can address the artist issue.
I actually did earlier.
Okay. In terms of visible minorities, not so much. And that's part of the problem there is that we don't ask for people to self-identify. So when they submit stories, many people do, but a lot of authors don't.
Ira, let me interrupt. I want to point out specifically that our submission engine was designed in order to prevent anybody from being able to figure out anything about the author of a particular work.
Yes, exactly. We have an anonymous system, so the first readers know nothing about the people who submit. That's more difficult. Can I talk about James's issue, though? Is that something we can talk about now?
I don't see why not, Kermit.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask, what sort of issue are you having with James?
So
Well, I could take that if you'd like.
Sure, go ahead.
It started actually with an inspiration that I got. The inspiration was initially based off of a novel by Lee Killow from the 80s, as I recall, about a police officer who was on an exchange mission to another planet and had encountered their very different concept of policing. And that was brought to my mind as the Black Lives Matters protests started up. And people started talking about defunding the police, which is a bad way, in my mind, of putting what they mean, but still interesting. I thought, what if, it's very interesting to confront something that is that inherently different from the current system that we all know. And I hooked up with a writer up out of the DC Baltimore area, James Beeman, and then Ira and Steve and I all talked about it. And what we're doing is we're working currently on an anthology called No Police, N-O Police, No Future, K-N-O-W Future, with the goal of presenting stories that represent, as suggested, a very different future where policing and things related to policing are handled in very different ways, and meant largely to be positive.
And
so,
James is a writer and editor of color. So and we deliberately looked for somebody. And I have to say that this whole thing bothers me, at least probably partly because of my age and how the society and the cultural norms I grew up with. But it bothers me in the sense that I don't want to be seen as involved in doing quotas for this kind of thing. And because that's not what it's all about. It's really about, we're trying to do outreach. We tried in a mild fashion to do outreach, talk to various people that we knew and let them know that we were a welcoming environment and that we wanted their participation. And that has not yielded the kind of response that we've been hoping for. So we're having to take more overt actions in order to try and make connections and bring some of these folks in a meaningful way. just by way of example, I determined after Amazing Con 2020 that we needed to really open things up for Amazing Con 2. So I've gotten in touch with our Spanish language editor, and I have asked her to begin thinking about bringing sessions in that would concentrate on Spanish language science fiction with the authors and whatnot that contribute to the website, because we do both. We do Spanish and English on the website. And we would do other languages if we had more people speaking those languages participating. My theory is that Google Translate is good enough to give you a sense of what they're saying. And I have gone to various Black organizations within science fiction and asked them to come on board. And we get initial interest and then a tailing off. So we're doing something wrong or not trying hard enough in the right way, but we're actively working on this aspect of what we're doing. We are definitely trying hard to make it as diverse and open and accessible to all the communities in science fiction that we can.
Okay. And on that note, I'm afraid we are out of time. If everybody could say a final word, and I'm literally saying word. Steve, you're first.
Art.
You're still
We have a lot of stuff out there that we didn't get to touch on here, so please visit the website.
okay. That's more than one word, Liz.
Thank you, everybody. I wanted to go to When Words Collide for years, and I'm so glad to meet you all and to have been here today. So thank you very much.
Okay. Nobody takes the editor seriously when he says single word. Okay. Bye.